Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on NCPERS semi-annual state and federal legislation webcast. My name is Hank Kim, and I'm the Executive Director of NCPERS. Today's program is part of our expanded Center for Online Learning. As we've all adjusted to remote programming, I continue to ask for your forbearance if there should be any technical issues or unplanned background noise during our session. As always, your patience and understanding is appreciated. Joining me today are our regular contributors, Bridget Early, Executive Director of the National Public Pension Coalition, or NPPC, and Tony Roda, partner at the law and lobbying firm of Williams Jensen. Today's format is our familiar one, which will be a moderated conversation with our two panelists. To help facilitate audience participation, we will be posing a few audience poll questions during this session. Also, we do encourage your questions and comments. Please submit your thoughts by using the Zoom Q&A function. However, to ensure that we cover all of our topics, we will hold your questions for the last part of the program. Tony, Bridget, welcome. Thanks again for being with us today. I trust you both had a good holiday season and are now getting geared up for the 2022 legislative cycle.
Absolutely.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Hank, for having us again.
Of course. So I'm sure we have a number of audience members who watched our semi-annual programming over the years, but there may be some new audience members. So just to give everybody a quick background and level set, Bridget, let me start with you. If you wouldn't mind just giving us a quick introduction of yourself and of NPPC and what NPP's function is. And then we'll ask Tony to do the same for himself and his firm.
Absolutely. So good afternoon, everybody. Even some good morning still, if you're further west. I'm Bridget Early. I am the Executive Director of the National Public Pension Coalition. NPPC, which has been around for nearly 15 years this year, we're coming up on our 15th anniversary, is the singular organization that is advocating for employees at the legislative level to ensure that public pensions are protected for those essential workers that can ensure that they can retire with dignity at the end of their career. And so through our partnerships with organizations like NCPERS, through other public sector unions, we are the ones that are adding the story to what a defined benefit pension means to our teachers, our nurses, our corrections department staff, our firefighters in the different state capitals, and demonstrating why something like a defined benefit is crucial for recruiting and retaining those essential public workers. So we operate this year in about 11 states across the country, ensuring that those conversations, any conversations that are about changing benefits for employees, have employee representation at the table. So that would be.
Great. Thank you, Bridget. Tony, a quick introduction of yourself and of Williams and Jensen, please.
Sure, Hank. Again, Tony Roda with Williams Jensen. Williams Jensen is a DC-based and DC-only law firm, and we were founded in 1970 with the express purpose of working government relations, both on the legislative and on the regulatory side. I've been with the firm now for more than 20 years, and in fact have represented public pension plans during almost the entire tenure that I've had at the firm. I've represented plans across the country on legislative issues, both playing defense and playing offense on some of our initiatives, and I've represented and had a great working relationship with Hank and NCPERS for about 15 years. So I really enjoy the friendships I've made over the years and enjoy the fight, and I know Bridget is the kind of the tip of the spear at the state capitals, and I kind of look at Hank and I as the tip of the spear in Congress, and I've enjoyed that role.
Thank you, Tony. Certainly, we agree with you. Our partnership over the last 15 plus years has been very fruitful. And Bridget, our membership in NPPC since 2007, 2008 has been also very fruitful and beneficial. So for folks to give you sort of a lay of where we're going to go over the next hour, what I'd like to do is do a little review relative to what happened last year in 2021, both at the state and federal level. And then the second half, we will do sort of a preview of what legislation and issues we can expect, as well as some thoughts about the upcoming midterm election. So with that, Bridget, give us a take, sort of an overview, 10,000-foot overview of what you saw happen at the state, or in the states in 2021.
Great. So I think what we saw was a little twofold. As far as overarching themes, I think we had to help some of our state coalitions and lawmakers understand how the federal relief that finally came into the states, what that meant for pension funds. As folks may recall, in 2020, at the time, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell had essentially said, you know, let states go bankrupt, let pensions go bankrupt, or let states go bankrupt, which I think for a lot of older members and retirees really created some nervousness and some anxiety that their pension systems were going to go away. And as you can also recall, states were the last ones really on the list to receive federal relief. Early in the pandemic, we saw relief go to airlines, we saw relief go to small businesses, while our essential public workforce was out there really delivering critical services without necessarily knowing where the money in this budget it was going to come from. And so once that federal relief came in and there were very clear regulations from the Treasury that this is not something that would go into pension funds, making sure that both our state coalitions and lawmakers that they engaged in understood those implications. In large part because we weren't, I think, employee groups as well as pension systems, as you guys are aware, were not requesting those funds anyways. So just making sure that people were following the regulations and to also avoid any opportunities for opponents to, you know, beat up on pensions and unfunded liabilities.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Go ahead, finish your thought.
I was going to move on to maintaining funding.
Yeah, please.
Oh, okay. So for as far as another trend that we saw, so in states like Colorado and Connecticut, we saw additional funding, or we saw funding that had been promised or additional funding come into the system. So in Connecticut, what is interesting about their financial setup is their rainy day fund, once it hits a certain threshold that is based, I believe, on a risk calculation, once that threshold is met, all additional dollars would then roll into the unfunded liability, which is a really smart way of setting it up because it demonstrates to those in the state that are likely to get those messages that taxpayers are on the hook for $20,000 in unfunded pension liability. Well, it shows that lawmakers are taking care of a rainy day fund, that if heaven forbid another recession like the Great Recession hit, states would be able to continue to deliver services and then be able to take care of some of this other unfunded liability that is on the books. So Connecticut ended up being able to put another $1.6 billion to pay down the unfunded liability through that mechanism. And in Colorado, the state made its promised $225 million payment in 2021. As you guys may recall, in 2020, that payment was skipped in part due to the pandemic and the lack of clarity around what tax revenues would look like at the end of the year. But as we've discussed time and time again, there is no formal mechanism that obligates states to have obligations for future payments. So when something like a bill similar to Colorado comes up, where SB 200 had all of these different concessions from different groups, both employees, employers, retirees, and the state, well, all the other parts are clearly codified, where employee and employer contributions will increase or decrease based on where they measure on their funding scale. Retirees also will see or not see cost of living adjustments based again on funding. And if the state walks away from making their $225 million payment, that impacts all those other groups as well, because it means that the system is not going to be on the track to stay in the green in order for those employee contribution rates to come down and for retirees to see that adjusted benefit. So I'll talk a bit about it later, but we are working on things going into 2022 to hopefully fix some of that. And then finally, sorry.
No, I was just going to comment that, like, particularly in Connecticut with that rainy day fund, and tying your comment about what the expectations were as we headed deeper into the pandemic, contrary to what we thought was going to be the worst case scenario in terms of tax revenue at the state level, most states actually had surpluses or did better than their estimated budget outlook. And so, for Connecticut, it was a great time to establish that rainy day fund.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then the final thing, we are regularly always worried about plan design. And so sort of twofold, we did see some bills that came through that either attempted to or actually did make changes to plan design. So there were some changes.
Bridget, let me ask you to hold on that thought for a second.
Yep.
And let me go to Tony. And Tony, give us a sense of sort of a macro sense, what thematically happened at the federal level in 2021. And then we can talk about some specifics too.
Sure. So 2021 was the first year since the first term of the Obama administration that the Democrats controlled both houses of Congress and the presidency. So when that happens, and it's been a big gap, there's always a lot of pent-up demand to get things done. Slowing them, however, has been COVID and the response to COVID, which they took care of in a legislative way for now with the American Rescue Plan early in 2021. So they're looking at issues that have been long debated and ripe. And included in the American Rescue Plan, we could talk about some of the details later, was financial relief assistance for multi-employer pension plans. While not public pension plans, we had looked at that legislation very closely. And again, we come back to it with some detail. Also teed up and ready to go for 10 plus years was infrastructure legislation. And again, that was legislation that we looked at because there were often rumblings about trying to incentivize public pension plans to do more in the way of investing in infrastructure. So those are two items that the Democrats were able to take off the table, again, for now, legislatively. And then there were a couple regulatory issues that I'll talk about. One popped up in the fall, and it dealt with the new withholding forms. And I know as NCPERS members, you received several important announcements from NCPERS as to the status of these new pension retirement distribution withholding forms. That was put off by the IRS late in 2021, but it gave a lot of folks heartburn. And then because of COVID and the nature of the workforce changing, the IRS did these FAQs on what is a bona fide retirement. What is really a separation of service when it comes to triggering the tax issues and the tax questions. So those are the issues I'm going to talk about in a little more detail. But Hank, I'd characterize it as a little bit of a cleanup session in that these issues were long debated and awaiting action. And then the overhang on all of us and everything of COVID.
Great, thank you, Tony. So the first of three poll questions is currently up. What percentage of millennials working in state and local government plan to stay in their jobs until retirement? We're going to be closing this poll momentarily, and then we're going to give you the answer soon thereafter. So yeah, so Bridget, wanted to, as people are still taking the poll, why don't you, I interrupted you, you were finishing a thought, and I'll ask you to continue on that. And then when you're done with that, we can go to the question, this Bridget, this millennial question that you posed.
Great. Yeah, and that ties in well to obviously what we regularly discuss here on this semi-annual pod or webcast, and what I talk about regularly is, you know, what happens with plan design changes, because while we are not seeing the same, I think, onslaught of attacks that we had seen, I think, especially pre-NPPC and in NPPC early years, they still come up. States still try to pursue options to making those changes. And so we saw attempts in Vermont and Arizona to make adjustments. In Vermont, what the adjustments that would be made would make it, it would take folks longer to retire. It would cost employees more over the course of the changes, which I know was really frustrating for the public employee groups in the state, because it really wasn't asking the state to help collaborate and fix the problem. In Arizona, the change there was to just the sort of section of employees that are under their state university system, or what they call their Board of Regents. So that bill has come back going into 2022. We did see specific changes made in Kentucky and Texas as well. On the flip side, you know, there have been efforts for some proactive movement in plan design. So for instance, in New Hampshire last year, as well as this year, trying to make adjustments to the pretty big reform from 2011, where they're trying to, I think, even out maybe some of the formula that penalizes employees who kind of fall into like a donut hole between their retirement and when Social Security kicks in, because they are employees that get Social Security. So they see a reduction if they retire at 65, because even though they're not getting their Social Security until 67. So making those kind of adjustments. Alaska, obviously trying to reopen the system, which a Supreme Court ruling in the state actually reopened the system to a majority of the public employees who had been impacted by the 2010 reforms. So I think there's not a lot of heavy lifting now, where we're not saying here's a very large pool of people that this legislation would impact, because the Supreme Court ruling already took care of that. So now let's take care of the others who could potentially benefit, as we have seen from the data, keeping public employees in Alaska through a pension. So as always, we live and breathe plan design and all the other fun things that are wrapped up in legislative session. So that recaps, I think, the really key things that we did in 2021.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Then, so to your poll question, what percentage of millennials working in state and local government plan to stay in their jobs until retirement? This poll question actually does have a right answer. And what is that answer, Bridget?
It is 85%.
Okay, so it's the one that got the lowest answer in our poll results. So yeah, so millennials are no different than most state and local employees. They value the service that they perform, and I think providing them with a solid benefit is certainly a way to retain these employees as well. So thank you, everyone. Tony, so what are some of the specific legislation or issues at the federal level you'd like to review?
For 2021, Hank?
Yes.
Yeah, let's go back to the two I mentioned on the legislative side. So the multi-employer assistance package, $86 billion made available through the PBGC for the most troubled pension plans. And these are not public plans. Again, these are collectively bargained plans for private sector workers, usually in the same or related industry. The tagline Taft-Hartley Plans is what is often used. We had been watching this because of concerns that were raised by members of the Ways and Means Committee during a hearing a couple of years ago now. But where the discussion was on instituting some type of cap on what these multi-employer plans could charge as a assumed rate of investment return, could use as that assumption. And again, that was not directly related to us, but there were 4 members of the committee at that time who said, well, if we do this over here for the multi-employer plans, we've got state and local governmental plans who are often using higher assumed rates of return than the multis. And whatever we do over here, we should institute on state and local governmental plans. Now, as it turned out, an all-Democratic Congress and a Democratic president did not go so far as to institute caps on discount rates for the multis. So we were never put into the bullseye or into the danger zone in 2021. Now, with that legislation, there could be amendments in the future, so we have to watch it closely on this discount rate issue. But I feel good about where we are today. Shifting to infrastructure, again, I had mentioned over the years, and Hank and I have been in many meetings and calls about this, different attempts, proposals to bring public pension plans into greater investments in infrastructure. None of those proposals came to fruition in the large infrastructure package passed by the House, but something is taking hold and getting a little traction. And this is the notion of asset recycling. So what it is taking what is now a public asset and producing revenue, say an airport, a toll road, a bridge, toll bridge, and in some way changing the ownership of that, whether it's just simply a lease, a sale, or something in between, to the private sector, and then using the proceeds of that for, as some have said, to buy down unfunded liabilities of public pension plans. There was just an op-ed piece in the Washington Post talking specifically about Baltimore Washington Airport and the fact that this would be a nice solution, as the author said, to help Maryland's pension funds. So I would watch very closely. Infrastructure, it's in place in federal law now, and it's a massive job of getting all these dollars out to the states and localities. I don't look for any changes right away, but it is something that we should keep our eye on in the future. Going back to the withholding form, that was handled in a way, IRS was headed down the road of putting these new withholding forms for pension distributions in place for 2022. And most, I don't know if it's most, but a lot of plans were just going along with the implementation. They had heard about it early enough, they weren't concerned. However, there were a lot of plans who came to this knowledge very much too late to do the implementation. And the first call I got from a client was in early September. Great concern about how to make this conversion. And NCPERS and the other trade associations on the public side, but also the private sector pension plans really pushed to delay. And we were pleased that in early November, the IRS delayed the use of these new forms until 2023, made the use of the forms optional for 2022. And then the final thing on what is an actual retirement for purposes of the tax law. So the COVID workforce, a lot of people chose to retire. And then a lot of people chose to retire who really weren't expected to retire. So you have the first tranche of retirees who went out with the full intention of not coming back. And then they get a call 2 months into their retirement saying, hey, look, half of our division has retired and would you come back? So what does that mean for retirement benefits and the taxation of retirement benefits? The IRS really didn't break any new ground, but they restated in an FAQ again in November that it is the intention of the employee upon retirement that controls it, and future events won't undo what was an actual retirement just because circumstances changed and that employee was now necessary to come back and chose to come back. So I think that gave some employers at the state and local level and employers throughout the country, private sector as well, some comfort in knowing that they weren't going to undo the retirement situation of these employees who returned. Those were the kind of the key areas.
Great, thank you, Tony.
2021.
So I think at this point, we're done with the review of 2021, unless I missed something from Bridget or Tony. Then let's shift gears and look to this year and what we can anticipate both federal legislation and regulation-wise, as well as state laws. And then we can talk about what we think the impact of the midterm elections might be. But Tony, why don't you start? And I think, Tony, you see the federal policy question that people are responding to. So with that in mind, as people are responding to it, why don't you give us a thought about what you're anticipating in 2022?
Well, the biggest retirement legislation, the most important bill on the table right now is what's being generally called the Secure Act 2.0. The original Secure Act was enacted in December 2019, and Congress doesn't usually move this quickly on retirement legislation, but has come back to this subject rather quickly. The House Ways and Means Committee has approved a bill which would make a number of changes, largely aimed at defined contribution plans, but some that would also impact defined benefit plans. So I'll just go through a short list of some of the key provisions. Required minimum distributions that were just raised in Secure would be raised again in Secure 2.0 to age 75. Now that would be done in a staggered way over time and not be fully phased in for 10 years. But that's a big jump, and it's an interesting jump when you think about the fact that longevity is greater, for one, and also the mindset of retirement plans and the assets therein is changing. And very much the required minimum distribution rules are there so that what had been tax deferred investments, first contributions and then investment returns building up in your funds would not be taxed until distribution. So the Treasury wanted a their revenue at some point and dictated through legislation that it should occur in these required minimum distributions. The mindset seems to be changing, at least in Congress, about this, and the fact that retirement plans are being viewed less as retirement plans and possibly more as estate planning tools, and allowing retirees to continue to hold assets is kind of the move toward an estate planning tool as opposed to a retirement fund. So we'll see how that goes, but there seems to be considerable interest in moving that age trigger again. There would also be increased flexibility when a plan makes an inadvertent overpayment of a benefit. Plans do need to have some ability to recoup, and will still have that, but there would be other options available to them. The Ketchup Contribution, which is used for those who are over age 50, these are defined contribution plans. So think 403B and 457B for our purposes. So there'd be an increase from $6,500 additional you could do each year to $10,000. And that would be for those age 62 to 64. But the catch on that is that those contributions would have to be done under the Roth method, which means it's going to have to be done with post-tax dollars, and then would be tax-free at distribution. There would also be a provision to eliminate the first day of the month rule for 457Bs, so that you can change your elective deferral at any time or with greater flexibility than that one day of the month. And also having matching contributions for student loan payments, which is really very interesting. So a student loan payment made by an employee could count toward their elective deferral, which could trigger a match on behalf of the employer. So that's going to be plan specific, but those are the types of things they're looking at. One issue that Hank and I have been working on to get into Secure 2.0 is changes to the HELPS provision, which is in the tax code today and allows a $3,000 annual exclusion to retired first responders for healthcare or long-term care premium payments. But the payments must be made by the retirement system to the healthcare provider. And this has caused a lot of concern, a lot of administrative hiccups on the parts of retirement systems. We're trying to, one, do away with the direct payment requirement, and two, increase the $3,000 annual cap, which hasn't been changed since 2006. And then also index that new cap level wherever it lands for inflation going forward. So those are provisions we've been working very closely with Senator Sherrod Brown from Ohio on that provision and looking for additional support. I'm going to mention two other things quickly. The Windfall Elimination provision, which is a Social Security offset, which hits persons who retire with both a retirement benefit earned through a non-FICA employment, and then also earned a Social Security benefit. WEP, in short, the short name for it, has been on the table for a very long time. There are repeal bills, there are WEP-only bills. WEP often in the repeal bills goes along with the government pension offset, which is another Social Security penalty. And then there's a major Social Security overhaul bill by Congressman Larson of Connecticut, who I know has spoken at NCPERS conferences. I don't know honestly how to characterize where WEP is, because the chairman of the committee, who does want to do a WEP bill, has been so overwhelmed with all of the first, the American Rescue Plan, infrastructure related issues, certainly with the multi-employer pension plan, and now with Build Back Better. So I can't tell. Secure 2.0 is more teed up than WEP is, but I know there's a lot of interest on that issue in the community, and I wanted to make sure that I mentioned it's still very much on the table. And the final thing is regulatory, and we're all waiting to see what the final rule is going to look like on environmental and social governance type investments. And there's been a seesaw between different administrations on this issue, and we should have a final rule from the Biden administration. Most folks are saying in the second or third quarters. So that's what we're looking at, Hank. Those are kind of the key issues.
And Tony, as you see, the web poll is up right now. Does the answer from either this or the policy question, is there any surprises there, or is this basically what you anticipated? Is the
It
response
confirms what I anticipated. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's good to know that, though.
So, Bridget, let's shift to the state level. What are you looking at? What states are you targeting? And are there any positives or offensive opportunities at the state level, or are we primarily going to be playing defense?
So I think it's still a mixed bag of both offense and defense. We're still in a lot of the states that we've been primarily in for the last couple of years. So to run through a quick list, and I apologize if I missed one, but Arizona, Connecticut, Colorado, Kansas, Kentucky, New Hampshire, Oklahoma, and Wyoming, plus Montana and North Dakota. I know for sure we've been partnering with, but having conversations with other states, like keeping in touch with Louisiana in case anything happens down there. Those sort of, we regularly monitor that. On the proactive side, I think, as I mentioned about the missed payment in 2020 for SB in Colorado, there's now a bill to have the state make up that payment, which is great. That will definitely help funding levels. It's a little unclear if the returns that were missed because that money wasn't in 2020, if that those dollars will also be a part of that package. Excuse me, sorry. Again, as far as some of the defensive stuff, we're keeping an eye on the Arizona bill I referenced for 2021 that just targets Board of Regents employees. It's reintroduced in a couple of states. I think we're just trying to pay attention to see what the appetite is for any plan design changes. And in part, those two of those states would be states that don't have legislative sessions this year, which are Montana and North Dakota. And so at the end of the 2021 legislative sessions, both passed bills that require interim studies on their systems during this time between now and the beginning of their next session in January of 2023. Montana's committee's charge is to evaluate the systems in general, and then they will roll out legislative recommendations in the fall. So again, those conversations are still happening. There's not been, I would say, specifics that have been released that demonstrate what direction the committee is looking to go in as far as plan design changes. North Dakota, the marching orders were very, very specific. They are asking the committee to study to see what it would take to close the DB side off to all future employees, and look at what costs that would incur, etc. So the solution, quote, solution has already been determined to being close. How we get there, and and that was, I think, the theme that lawmakers left with at the end of 2021. And so hopefully throughout this interim, they're able to continue to have discussions to maybe move away from having such a prescribed solution to go into 2023, and maybe be able to look and see, are there plan design changes actually needed to make the system different or better for North Dakota workforce? This is also a state, as well as several other states, you know, to reference back to the earlier poll question, where your mid-career, younger career workforce are generally referenced as reasons why we need to move from a traditional defined benefit plan to a defined contribution, in large part because there's a lot of discussion around, oh, well, millennials, they love to move around, they want that flexibility. You know, defined contributions are portable, so, you know, that's always an added benefit, in which I scream into a pillow that pensions are portable and then try to explain that to someone else. And so I think also just combating the fact that millennials also would like to have the same sort of pathway to economic security that other generations had. And the reason a lot of millennials jump around is because most of that pathway was completely eroded by generations before us. And so when you strip away defined benefit plans in the public sector, and you saddle a entire generation with historical amounts of student loan debt, and then when they leave college, there's one of the most historic recessions to happen, if not also a housing market crash. It takes a lot to just even get your financial footing those first several years out of college. And so because millennials have been trying to keep their head above water and maybe jumped around positions because they needed to find something that helped make ends meet, I think that has been misconstrued in a workforce that doesn't have an attention span and just wants to jump around. So I think there's context that needs to be explained, especially to lawmakers who definitely want to see their states run like businesses as well. So I think that is really just going to continue to be the theme as the millennial workforce continues to grow as the predominant group of people that are working today.
Okay, thank you, Bridget.
Oh.
So then continuing sort of the forward looking, we do have midterms elections coming up in November. Tony, let me turn to you first. What are you anticipating, and what are the implications of the midterm election at the federal level?
Well, I'm going to start with the House, which is, it's always harder to forecast in some respects because there are so many seats, but in other respects, it moves in such waves, you know, that sometimes isn't that difficult. I'll start with the brief statement. Midterm elections of first-term presidents are not good for the president's party. In the House, recently, the numbers have been staggering, and it's Republican and Democrat. Trump in 2018 lost 40 seats. Obama in 2010 lost 63. The aberration was George W. Bush, and his midterm came in 2000, first midterm came in 2002, right after 9/11, with an entirely different set of domestic politics at play, and he was able to pick up 6 seats. But go back to Clinton, who lost 52 in 1994. So the numbers are staggering, and I think the waves occur because either there's a recognition on the part of the voters that they want balance because there has been an overreach by the party in power, or the minority party has been effective in making it seem like there's been an overreach. either way, the voters move kind of in big waves in this first midterm. So the House right now is 221 to 212 with 2 vacancies. The Democrats, of course, having that slim majority. The big issue for the House is redistricting right now. It's not complete. Some plans have been sent back for further work, right? Because they have, violated or have been sent through the judicial system and found to have been violative of Voting Rights Act. But redistricting looks, and I've been watching the Cook report. The Cook report is very good. David Wasserman has very insightful. And he's saying right now it's either a wash or a slight advantage to the Republicans. But he's also making the conclusion, which I fully agree with, is that the big winner is lack of competition. And if you look at seats in the House that were 5 percentage points or under, so really battleground districts, those are going to shrink from 34 to 19 in the next Congress, and then for the next 10 years, essentially. And also the consolidation by the parties, right? So you have seats that went to Trump by 5 percentage points or more would move from 106 to 117. And likewise, Biden seats, more blue seats would go from 138 to 144. Ramifications of this are that you're going to have a body where the center is so narrow. And you could look at the Senate right now, where basically a handful of senators control whether things get done or don't get done. And you always see the same two names, Senator Manchin, Senator Sinema. But if the Republicans had a slight majority, there would be 2 moderates probably who would stand out and have the same kind of ability to slow things down. That's the Senate. In the House, you're going to have a very polarized body with a center that's so narrow that it probably won't be able to dictate much. For policy purposes, the House can kind of move quickly on things and oftentimes outstrip the ability, oftentimes, of the Senate to comply and move the same. So I think that's what we're looking at, is a very kind of polarized House right now going forward. The Senate, often the Senate elections move in a different way because the candidates are so high profile, so well known in the states, that they have their own kind of personality. So the Senate being at 50-50 right now, the prognosticators say of the 34 seats, because remember, not all Senate seats are up every 2 years, about a third. This year it's 34 seats. 8 are viewed as battleground. I really only put 3 right now in battleground. Pennsylvania, where Senator Toomey is retiring, and that's going to be a very competitive race that Democrats think they can win and flip a seat. Wisconsin, where Ron Johnson is running again, but a state that could go either way. And then Georgia, with the reelection of Warnock, where the Republicans feel like they should be able to win that. There are other seats that could come into play, very much so, and that is going to depend on the candidates. If candidates really emerge that capture the imagination of the voters, you can have some interesting races. I'll just throw one out for kind of DC local interest, and that's in Maryland, where Mitch McConnell is lobbying the governor, the Republican governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan, very hard to get into the Senate race against Chris Van Hollen. If he were to do so, that race goes from, a 0 in the competitive perspective or spectrum to, probably a very competitive race. It's a different race, governor versus senator, and Hogan may not have the same level of support, or he may have more. So the Senate, it's really hard to call. I would have to say, Hank, that one body probably will flip just by looking at it right now. And unfortunately, the body that does flip is going to be doing what minorities do, the minority party, given that the president is not of the same party. So a House majority Republican would probably go into a lot of investigations and a lot of oversight of the administration, and probably not legislate a great deal. So we could have that type of dynamic, but it's early. But you see what's happened in these midterm elections. There's a lot of volatility in the electorate.
Great, thank you, Tony. And Bridget, at the state level, are there governorships, trifectas, or legislatures that you're keeping an eye on?
I think just from a 10,000 foot view, we'll be watching the types of candidates that come forward. I'll be interested to see how many more, corporate CEO types want to toss their hat into the ring to change state government into a business. Because I think a lot of folks who have made that turn have been disappointed in what they think they should have been able to get done. So I think an example, again, being in North Dakota, of having somebody who would want to see state government flip and sort of be able to operate, be able to turn and maneuver quickly, is not really how state government functions. So I'll be interested to see how those candidates come out, seeing how their counterparts in other states have fared. It's also going to be the first, I think, big election where we will see the impacts of how they view state services going into the election, how they take away from that, because I think there are a lot of states who respect and are in awe of the leadership of their executives, their lawmakers, to navigate such an unprecedented crisis. Are people happy with that and will show up for those governors? Will the flip side be upset still? Will that still be such a motivating factor for those who have opposed the way their government ran during this? Like, this will sort of be a really good barometer of being away from, I think, some of those really some of those restrictions or non-restrictions that went into place for public safety, how people really view that, and if that's a motivating force. And then finally, I think, we're going to see another cycle where the amount of money that pours in is astronomical. And so how does that shape what we talk about going into the 2023 legislative session? So those are the big things I'm looking at.
Great, thank you both. So we're almost at the top of the hour. I don't see any questions from the audience, so let me ask this question of both of you, which is, in 2021, we continued this very sharp recovery from the COVID recession, and a lot of plans returned historic numbers. Have those returns, in your opinion, have you seen a decrease in political pressure on public plans because of these good returns, or is the ground still very much the same? From a federal perspective, Tony, if you can answer that, and Bridget, from a state and local perspective, if you could answer that for us.
I think the logical answer and reaction would be there should be less pressure. But I think the same voices that have been negative to public plans about their investment rates of return continue to say the same thing, even though the investment rates of return were tremendous. So I think you're still going to see these this group that has been out there that is well known to all of us would continue to churn and say that we are unrealistic in thinking that we're going to be able to continue these investment returns, and that these plans have been underfunded for years and returns are not going to be the answer. But we also have seen certain plans lower their discount rate in the face of these strong returns. So, you know, that will take some of the wind out of the sails of the detractors.
On the state side, I think the part that I've been paying attention closely is to see how, when our opponents frame the 2021 investment returns in a negative light, has that penetrated an audience? And I don't really think it has. I think, yes, it has taken pressure down off of states. It hasn't, I think, in my recollection, absolved or rectified, I think, what states are facing enough to like change trajectory of things. So I think there are still going to be states that where this is a conversation will continue to be a conversation. Maybe they're just not using the unfunded liability as the rationale to diminish employee benefits. And then I see, like, how would I respond to a lawmaker who believes that a plan has been mismanaged, or is it not at 100%? If you would like me to do, is that something?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. Is really like, you have to look at the other factors that come into place. Like, I wouldn't say to someone, well, clearly your finances are mismanaged because your house hasn't been completely paid off this past year. Like, no, like, we have advanced financial tools that, like in home ownership, that help pave a way to getting to fiscal stability. And so it's not just how much money that account has in it today, but rather, are we on a path to be at 100%? And if that answer is no, that's the crux of it. If you aren't solving for the future, that's where the frustration and the focus should be on.
And then Bridget, last question. I don't know if you see it, but it's using Colorado as an example. Recent pension reform marks their second set of reforms in the last decade. In your opinion, are legislative bodies nationally beginning to realize pension reform is not necessarily a set it and forget it strategy, that they need to reassess financial health on a consistent basis?
So unfortunately, I think we're giving a little bit too much credit that it's a set it and forget it strategy, and rather it is more of a, this is the thing that got the most attention this legislative session, so let's fix it and move on. And I don't know if there are lawmakers per se that are really the stewards of pension systems. By the time a lawmaker is involved, it is because something needs to be fixed. So if I am trying to set up this, I think what has been outlined here is like, how are we really checking in on the financial, the path that the pension has been on with particular reforms that have put into place? That is really something that both employee groups that, you know, that are impacted by changes and the systems themselves kind of serve as the hall monitors for those reforms. And so being able to say, and then being able to actually provide evidence-based solutions rather than having lawmakers say, oh no, we got terrible returns this 1 year and the unfunded liability skyrocketed, let's burn the whole system down. So I think we cannot rely on legislative bodies to necessarily be those stewards. And it really needs to fall on organizations like ours to continue to bring proactive solutions forward.
Great, thank you. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. So thank you both Bridget Early and Tony Roda for, again, participating in our semi-annual legislative review and outlook. I look forward to doing this again in July as we look upon the first half of 2022. And I thank everybody in the audience for joining us today. Please join us on February 15th when we host our next webinar on our annual Public Retirement System Study and Dashboard Review. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.